I'm so excited for this moment and to get rolling. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get going.
Okay.
Let's do it. Welcome to another episode of Ring Them Bells, where we interview top scholars to help you rediscover the Bible on its own terms. Today, we have with us a living legend and top scholar and translator of the Hebrew Bible, Dr. Robert Alter. Robert Alter is an American professor emeritus of Hebrew and comparative literature at the University of Berkeley in California, where he has taught since 1967. Alter received his master's and doctorate from Harvard University in comparative literature. Robert Alter has published over 24 books, including an award-winning translation of the Hebrew Bible, which was 23 years in the making. Alter's book, The Art of Biblical Narrative, won the National Jewish Book Award for Jewish Thought. As a translator, Alter has tracked verse by verse through the Hebrew Bible to make the narrative and literary structures visible in English. Today, we are going to be in the presence of a significant figure who has helped many understand the Bible on its own terms. Buckle up and get ready for an episode that is going to challenge our modern evangelical assumptions about the Bible while encouraging us to find the truth in the narrative of the Hebrew Scriptures. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show with me, the great and powerful, Dr. Robert Alter. Okay, the crowd goes wild. And rightfully so, sir. Robert, it is an absolute pleasure and honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
Well, we are happy to have you. We're going to dive right into the Bible, but for anyone looking for more on Robert's personal story, check the notes of this video, as I'll have a link to the New York Times article written about Robert by author Avi Steinberg, and it goes over Robert's amazing story and more. The article is actually going to get cited multiple times today. That's why I bring it up as well. But let's dive straight into the Hebrew Bible. Robert, I hope I don't offend you, but in my modern street lingo, I consistently say that the Hebrew Bible is so dope. I want to ask you why that is. The Hebrew people and nation of Israel geographically and archaeologically are known to be a small civilization that was consistently under the boot of the ruling empire. Why do you think the Hebrew scriptures have stood the test of time and have been appreciated and honored more than any other writing in history?
Well, of course, the obvious reason is that the Hebrew Bible has become canonical for Christians and for Jews. Christians, of course, added the New Testament to it. So over the centuries, Jews and Christians read these texts. So it's not one book. Keep in mind, it's a kind of anthology, I would say, that spans at least 9 centuries, which is a little mind-boggling.
Yeah.
The New Testament is very different in that respect. It only covers a few decades, less than a century. So this set of texts was regarded, or has been, and still is regarded by Jews and Christians as the Word of God. So, of course, and it was the first religious tradition to articulate the vision of monotheism. So you can understand in purely theological terms why this set of books produced, as you rightly say, by a very small nation that was the boondocks in the ancient Near East, why it has been avidly read. But I'd like to add the following. Years ago, I wrote an essay called the double canonicity of the Hebrew Bible.
Mm.
That is, it's canonical for two terms that I would say overlap and reinforce each other. The first is what I just said, that it's viewed as the Word of God. But the second is that it is an astonishing literary achievement. And there's no fathoming why it should be so. That is, when you consider that the culture of ancient Israel, if you compare it to Assyria, if you compare it to Egypt, was kind of small potatoes. That is, its visual art was pretty much stick figures. Its architecture, even though we talk about the glory of Solomon's temple and so forth, was no competition to the ziggurats of Mesopotamia or to the pyramids of Egypt and so on and so forth. And yet, for reasons which I think we never will understand, it's one of those mysteries of culture. This small society produced narratives that really eclipse anything in their surroundings,
Mm.
and were easily a match for the great Homeric epics in a very different kind of narrative mode. And then it produced poetry from the Psalms to the Song of Songs to the great poetry of the prophets that just soared above anything around them. And I think that over the centuries, readers have been drawn to the Bible both because they viewed it as divine revelation and because it spoke to them as great literature.
Mm. Oh, I agree with you. The titles, the preface of two of the books of your titles is The Art of Biblical Poetry or The Art of Biblical Narrative. And it's that art that I think, like what you're saying, that keeps attracting people back. And the truth is like I said, that the nation of Israel and even Jewish people to this day are, they were back then under the boot of empire and consistently oppressed. And when you look for a good artist in this day and age, anybody that's like a great artist, whether it's a painter or a musician, a lot of times they have things that have, whatever pain that has been through their life that's caused them to write something so beautiful or put out something or paint something so beautiful. And personally, as I see the nation of Israel go through their, woes of exile and all the things, it's almost like it helped them produce, in my opinion, this is just me answering the same question I asked, that just helped them produce that, like what you said, that the preface of your books, the art that is so wonderful and that we're going to get into here today. I don't want to, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yes. If in what scholars call the late biblical period, which basically is the period that evolved in the Babylonian exile and then under the Persians, you have a proliferation of new kinds of literature. And among the books that were produced then, there are three or four, I guess I would say four, that seem to, I don't know, disrupt the biblical consensus. There's the book of Job. There's the book of Ecclesiastes, which for the rest of this session I will call Kohelet, which is easier to pronounce and is what biblical scholars generally call it today. And then there's the book of Esther and the Song of Songs. Now, two of those four books, the Song of Songs and Esther, make no mention of God.
Uh,
And the other two, Kohelet and and Job don't well they articulate visions which are very different from what you get in Genesis, what you get in prophets, and you might even view them as dissenting from the biblical consensus. So, what are they doing in the Hebrew Bible?
Mm.
Well, of course, in the case of Job and Kohelet, I think you can say that there is a profundity of expression of in the case of Job, the suffering of the just person. How can you explain this with a just God? And in the case of Kohelet, a, a sense of the cyclical nature of existence, the fact that it doesn't seem to be going anywhere, it's all swallowed up in the end by death. These are challenges to biblical faith, to the mainstream biblical faith, and challenges that I think the makers of the canon felt had to be included.
Mm.
But I would add the following, that those two books, plus Song of Songs and Esther, are wonderful literature. I mean, the greatest poetry in the whole Hebrew Bible is in Job, and there's very moving prose poetry in Kohelet, and then you have this wonderful love poetry in the Song of Songs, and a kind of festive, at times even hilarious story in the book of Esther. So it was not only the, let's say, the ideological content of these books that got them into the canon, but the fact they were so good as literature that readers and canon makers didn't want to give them up.
Mm.
Hence, what I call the double canonicity.
Mm. They checked both boxes. That's beautiful. And to those final editors and arrangers, and that's what I want to talk about next, because I think that part's really important to understand, and something that was, your work was revolutionary for helping me understand. Many, like myself, were taught a false view of the Bible as if it were some perfect golden tablet dropped out of the skies. And even with further discretion, we were still led astray with teachings like Moses being the only author of the Pentateuch. It's a tragedy because when many like myself go through Bible college and discover the Bible on its own terms, it becomes a scandal to see the truth of its real historical manifestation. But I want to help fix that with you. So Robert, who were these, what you call arrangers or final editors of the Hebrew Bible? And are they the mastermind behind this biblical artistry and connectivity of the Hebrew text? Help us understand that side of it.
Sure. Okay, I would say right off the bat, they're not the masterminds behind it. The Before these books in the late biblical period, which we can talk about later in more detail if you would like, the bulk of the Hebrew Bible was produced in the First Temple period, which is roughly from, I don't know, if you push it back very far to 900 BCE to 586 when the Babylonian exile begins. Now, there are, by the way, some poetic texts that go earlier than 900, like the Song of Deborah in Judges 5, which may well go back as early as 1100 BCE. So the masterworks of that long period were produced before there was arranging or editing. And what happened uh, when the Judahites, I should say, went into exile, not all of them, some of them stayed in the kingdom of Judah. But when most of them went into Babylonian exile, they um, uh, they shouldn't have survived.
Mm.
That is mostly when populations were deported in exile, and we're all thinking a lot about deportation these days in America. Uh, they assimilated to the place where they came. And the proof text for that is the 10 lost tribes. That is, the Assyrians uprooted most of the population of the northern kingdom of Israel. And this was a regular imperial policy. They would deport the local population and then bring in people from other parts of the empire and relocate them in the conquered territory. And that was a way of uh, um, taking out a kind of insurance policy against rebellion by the conquered population. So, what happened to the 10 lost tribes? How did they get lost? They got lost because they assimilated. They became Assyrians wherever they were taken.
Mm.
That did not happen with the southern kingdom, with the Judahites. Why didn't it happen? Because they took books with them.
Mm.
And the books became a kind of portable homeland. And in the exile, the books were arranged slash edited by priestly scribes, and that's when the the bulk of the Hebrew Bible was consolidated. And the fact that they had these books uh, was what preserved their identity.
No.
Now, um, so what was the role of the editors? Well, first, they did what editors do everywhere. They arranged the order of the books. They went over, no doubt, multiple scrolls, multiple manuscripts, and selected some kind of dominant version. Uh, they also occasionally intervened. Now, I'll explain the intervention in this way. Um, the 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 editors, well, I said priestly, but um, the the editing was governed by the Deuteronomistic school
Mm.
that came to the fore around 621 BCE. So that was still in the First Temple period.
Mm.
But the Deuteronomists went into exile and put together these texts. And there were certain points where they introduced their own materials. Sometimes they were a little uncomfortable with the texts that they edited, and they felt they couldn't mess with them. That is, that they couldn't delete them because they were authoritative, right? But what they did was add an occasional intervention. And I'll give you one piquant example. David, on his deathbed, summons Solomon, and he says, "You are a wise man, Solomon. You will know what to do." But this wisdom is not the kind of wisdom you see with Solomon and the two women who say that the live child is theirs, the so-called wisdom of Solomon. It is shrewd, practical wisdom.
Mm.
It's realpolitik wisdom. He says, "You are a wise man, Solomon, as I am about to go in the way of all the worth, and you will know what to do." And then he gives him a hit list. He mentions uh, um, uh, um, uh, uh, let's see, Shimei, the Benjaminite who cursed him when he fled into exile. He says, "You will know what to do with these people. That is to make sure you kill them."
Yeah.
And the Deuteronomist was not comfortable with this. They did not want David to be presented to posterity as a capo de mafia. So what they did was they then added to David's oral testament to Solomon a a whole paragraph of piety in which David says to Solomon, um, "What you must do is go in the ways of the Lord and fulfill all His commandments, and love Him with all your heart and with all your might." These are formulas from the book of Deuteronomy.
Hmm.
I don't think they were part of the original story, but the Deuteronomistic editor felt he had to intervene.
Hmm.
So anyway, that's what that's how the whole thing evolved.
That's beautiful, and it's seeing that there were these multiple phases and completion, and you gave some timestamps there. Do you have any kind of timestamp? And because there was no moment, there wasn't like a moment where somebody walked out of the temple and was like, "Here, I present the Tanakh, it's finished." I don't think that we have that historically. But when would you say that this came into its final form? And I think also one point that I want to emphasize, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that as we talk about these editors or arrangers, those weren't just one moment of time. That was a continuous moment over the years of these editors, arrangers that brought it into this final form of the Tanakh. Am I right on that, or help us
You're
understand?
absolutely right on that. Now, I would say this that we have a pretty good sense that the Pentateuch was uh, a complete edited text by sometime in the 5th century BCE, because that is when Ezra declared that it should be read publicly.
Mm.
So that is the first stage of canonization. Now, it's hard to get any sense of what the pre-canonical status was of the other books beyond the Pentateuch. Um, but they probably, well, the Dead Sea Scrolls gives us some evidence.
Mm.
That is, as you probably know, um, all the books of the Hebrew Bible, at least pieces of them, are found in the Qumran scrolls, with
Yeah.
the one exception of Esther.
Mm.
That is, my guess is that the sectarians who lived in Qumran, overlooking the Dead Sea, they were very pious people, and they probably considered the Book of Esther to be too frivolous,
Mm.
so that they left that out. But they had all the others, and there are some variances from the received texts that has come down to us, which, by the way, wasn't edited in its final form until the last couple of centuries before the year 1000 by Hebrew grammarians in Tiberias.
Mm,
So there are some divergences from that received text, but it's pretty much the same thing.
mm,
So we now the Dead Sea Scrolls date back to the first and second centuries before the Common Era. So you can assume that by then the the stabilization of the Hebrew text of the Bible was pretty much in place.
mm. Yeah, we just the last interview last week. We interviewed Dr. Andrew Perrin, who's an expert on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he brought a lot of this over to us. And it was very interesting to understand too that it wasn't until 1990 that like actual Jewish scholars started to really get a hold of these scrolls and open them up for the context and value that they offer. But what a monumental discovery that happened,
Yeah.
and you know, in our lifetime to see. And for it to change so much of not change so much, but help us rediscover so much about the text. So what I wanted to move on to is understanding the Bible as fiction. Actually, you know what? We're going to go back to this because I think it's good. You mentioned the word authority in what you just said back there. And as a translator, this is a question that I think I really want to understand. I think is important as I try to go to the Bible and to get authority from it. The thing that has worked for me best is to try to get the authority of the Bible as it lies with the original authors and what their intended meaning was for their original audience. And we might throw in their authors, arrangers, like we just said. And to get this truth from the Bible, we must get it from the original authors and not our own modern understanding. Does that make sense to you? And was that kind of your inside your process of what you did for interpretation? Help me understand if there's anything to that.
Absolutely. That is, you might view the Hebrew Bible sort of like a painting that has been overlayered with lacquers and various substances over the ages. For example, Rembrandt's The Night Watch, when it was restored to its original state, it didn't take place at night at all. It just got darkened over the ages. So, so my sense is that the Hebrew Bible, by Jews as well as Christians, but by the way, had been over the centuries covered by a kind of shellac, and we didn't see the true chromatic values of the original. And to the best of my ability, and everybody's abilities are imperfect, of course, I tried to scrape away that sediment and get back to the freshness of the original. So I'll give you one example from Psalms. Okay, I'll start with which is something I guess of a bête noire or a fixation for me. Uh, I never use the word soul in my translation.
Mm,
I don't because I'm convinced that the Hebrew writers had no notion of soul as distinct from body.
mm,
And the word that later, by the way, in rabbinic Hebrew as well as in all the translations, like anima in the Vulgate, uh, later it came. The word nefesh came to mean soul, but its primary meaning is breath, as in life breath. And you see this in the creation story when God breathes life into the human creature.
mm,
So uh, Unfortunately, although I generally like to use the same English term for the same Hebrew term, nefesh means several different things in biblical Hebrew. It means life breath, person, and then we get to some surprising meanings. It means appetite. Uh, it means throat or neck. Now, your puzzled viewers, how the heck does life breath come to mean throat? Well, it's by a process that literary scholars call metonymy. Don't get scared by the fancy term. There are two ways to connect disparate things. One is because they're similar, like my love is a red, red rose. You know, she's a rose because she's sweet, she's fragrant, she's beautiful, right? That's metaphor. Metonymy is when two things are linked because they're contiguous, they're in touch with each other. For example, in Damon Runyon English, a a pretty young woman is called a skirt, not because she resembles a skirt or looks like a skirt, because she's wearing a skirt. Okay,
Mm.
so that's why nefesh all means not only life breath but throat, because the throat is or the neck is the passageway for the life breath.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a famous howler of the King James Version is waters have come up even unto my soul. Well, what could that possibly mean? Is the soul part of some plumbing system? Of course, what the Hebrew is saying is waters have come up even unto my neck because I'm about to drown.
Mm.
So now I'm going to take a more piquant example. In one of the Psalms, somewhere in the 60s, I don't always remember the numbers of Psalms, I confess. It begins in all the translations, my soul thirsts for you, O God, in a parched land without water. Now that's beautiful.
Mm.
But then I looked at the context in a parched land without water. And then the parallel second half of the verse speaks of flesh, which is part of the body.
Yeah.
So then it dawned on me, it has to mean my throat thirsts for you, O God, in a parched land without water. Now, that's not as beautiful as my soul thirsts for you, but it has a kind of powerful physical immediacy, like a man wandering through the desert.
Yeah.
The water in his water skin has been exhausted. He's desperate. He needs a swallow of water. That's how urgently I thirst for you, oh God.
Yeah.
And what I would say is this, I'd go on to a bit of a generalization that I think the spirituality of Psalms and maybe of the Hebrew Bible as a whole is anchored in the human body.
Mm.
And that takes it to a different place, different from later Christianity and later Judaism than we're accustomed to. And I try to get back to that in my translation.
Mm. And you do. And I love that example that you brought up for getting the authority of the text and going back to its original meaning is not always going to be particularly easy in modern English. And that's why I think it's so important. I say this all the time because I personally don't know the ancient languages perfectly, but I think it's really important to, if you don't know the ancient languages and you're trying to get the authority and truth from the scripture, you need to know somebody that you trust and love that does know them very well, And that's why I'm so glad that we have you and we have your translation, because it's been such a valuable resource for myself and millions. So I want to move over to another, like this is like a watershed moment in my life that I want to share with you, and it'll lead to a question. I want to move on to understanding the Bible as fiction. And I'm sure some of my viewers, their skin's crawling right now when they hear the word Bible and fiction, because just like myself, we all grew up in a world where if you mention the word fiction and the Bible, you'd probably be literally cast out of the church. But your book, The Art of...
Sure.
Yeah, exactly, right? Your book, The Art of Biblical Narrative, was revolutionary for me to understand the authors and arrangers of what you call the use of historical prose fiction. Like, I'll never forget, it's this exact book right here. It's actually been waterlogged. I've read it at the beach. It's near and dear to my heart. I'll never forget when I turned to that page and you explained historical prose fiction. Like, it literally it was like an opening. My eyes opened, and all of a sudden so much made sense of why I was having such conflict with understanding the text on its own terms. And it was revolutionary for me. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for the work that you did in this book and for writing about that. And now what I want to do is I want to help my audience discover that same part, and how prose fiction is not a scandal, but actually a sign of intelligent design within the text to convey truth. So first, I have a video clip that I prepared that I think you're going to like. We're going to watch it. It's really short, and it helps us understanding fiction and the Bible and how they go together. Let's watch that and then discuss. How does that sound?
Sure.
Let's do it.
If you have a sense that there's this stuff in the Bible, and surely this stuff in the Bible must be connected. I mean, this idea over here must have some relationship to some idea over there, but I can't see it. Again, you're correct. Your suspicion is correct. The Bible is an intelligently designed, intelligently planned, intelligently executed thing. But the connectivity that they both articulate in writing, and that their original readers would have picked up just like that, is invisible to us. And that's a problem, because we can't see the layering of the story. We don't know what's in the foreground and what's in the background. We don't really know how an idea is propelled from Genesis to Revelation. We can't see the trajectories. We can't see the threads. We can't see the breadcrumb trail, because the Bible typically is taught to us like we're reading a textbook. Here's a passage, here's 3 points in a poem, memorize the 3 points, and you got the lesson for today. There's no effort at connecting it to anything else. And every passage of Scripture doesn't just connect to one thing. It connects to a number of things. Again, it's intelligently planned. This is why I tell people that they would be better off if they read Scripture, they read the Bible like it was fiction. Because you know, when you read a novel, that the writer is intentionally trying to do something to you. You can read a conversation, you get a bit of dialogue, you get a scene, you get a car, you get this or that place, and you know instinctively, because you're reading a novel, that, I'm going to see that again. I was supposed to see that and think this thought. Is the writer leading me in the right direction, or is it misdirection? You know that the writer is doing something to you. So, I want to try to provide a framework for seeing the connectivity, seeing the story, and focusing on the story from the specific perspective of the ancient writers, not us, not anything modern. The fundamental problem that I'm trying to get after saying all that is that we have a problem being able to read the Bible the way it was intended to be read.
Let me make the case with an example.
Okay.
Okay, we have the David story.
Yep.
Now, this is extremely important. Of course, for Christians, it's doubly important because David is the ultimate progenitor of Jesus of Nazareth. But even if you set that to one side, for Jews, David is the founder, divinely anointed by the prophet Samuel, of the dynasty of the kingdom of Judah. Now, I should say there are scholars who think that David is a fictional invention, that there never was a David. There's no limit to the skepticism of scholars. I don't buy. I don't buy that at all. Maybe a few decades ago, an inscription was found with the Hebrew words "Beit David," the house of David. So people got very excited. Oh yes, there really was a Davidic dynasty. I think that there are good grounds to assume that David was a historical figure. We don't know how long after the death of David the story was written. Some scholars put it a couple of centuries later. I tend to think that it's within a few generations, maybe even a generation or two. So there might have been oral reports that the scholar, that the writer drew on. But and I would think that the main events of the narrative were historical. That is, David being preceded in the monarchy by Saul, a civil war between the house of Saul and the house of David after Saul's death, the conquest of Jerusalem, and a few other main points. But you look at specific incidents in the story. Let's take the moment where Saul goes into the cave at Adullam to relieve himself, and then falls asleep. David and his men come upon Saul. They see him inside the cave. A couple of David's henchmen want to kill him. He said, "Oh no, he's the Lord's anointed. We can't do that." But what he does, he creeps into the cave. He cuts off a corner of Saul's cloak and takes it outside with him. Cloaks, I don't want to get into that unless you want me to. Cloaks are very important through this whole story. They're kind of thematic motif. So when Saul comes out of the cave, David calls to him, and then David delivers himself of this elaborate self-justification that I didn't want to harm you, I didn't want to displace you. Why are you pursuing me? And he ends his speech, and it's really a speech with a master rhetorical stroke. He says, "After whom did the king of Israel pursue? After a dead dog? After a flea?" You see, as in biblical poetry, there's an intensification from the first half of the statement to the second. A dead dog is a very lowly thing, but then there's the flea on the dog, which is almost amusing, but it's a brilliant rhetorical move. And then Saul says, "Is this you? Is this your voice, my son David?" This is a heartbreaking statement. Now, where did the writer get this from? As with many other episodes in the David story, nobody else is present except Saul and David. So he couldn't have relied on a report. He couldn't have relied on a scroll. He had to invent it. So that's fiction. It's, let's say, historical fiction. But what does historical fiction seek to do? As in, let's say, a great piece of historical fiction like War and Peace.
Mm.
It tries to understand what went on in history through the imaginative medium of fiction. So, in the contrasting speeches of David and Saul, you have David, who's a master of language. He's a poet, as we know. He composes these elegies later for Saul and Jonathan, as previously he's composed a shorter elegy for Abner. He's a master of language, and he's using language to protect his own position, because he's not only a poet, but he's a political man. Saul, on the other hand, is impulsive, and his paranoid impulses have led him to try to kill David. But at the same time, he's a man of feeling. And at this moment of confrontation, his recollection of when he regarded David as a kind of son and nurtured him in the court, it breaks through. And he articulates these heartfelt words. Is it your voice, David, my son? So it's very moving, and it expresses a real imaginative understanding of what the figures of the historical figures, I think, of Saul and David might have been like.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you gave that. That's such a great little nugget about that moment in the cave. And what I think so important to understand is that fiction for the biblical authors did not mean falsification like we have it in our modern context.
Right.
It meant their way. It was a literary tool for them to express the truth that they were conveying through the writing about this historical figure or whatever. You know, it doesn't change the fact per se of the historicity of certain things, but it's, again, approaching the Bible on its own terms. We're going to see that you correct me if I'm wrong, but the Bible is like a mosaic of literature, and you got to know, you know, kind of where you are and what you're reading to get it. And to that point of it being a mosaic of literature, I want to move on to seeing the Bible as narrative, because I think that's, you know, is so important. And another thing that I was so grateful when I discovered the Bible as a unified narrative. Your work was groundbreaking for me to finally see it as this cohesive narrative and not some disjointed library of rule books. I want to focus on the difference between epic narratives of the pagan religions and what you call the historical prose narrative of the Hebrew Bible. Let me first read a quote from your book where you cite Israeli Bible scholar Shemaryahu Talman. The quote goes, "The ancient Hebrew writers purposefully nurtured and developed prose narration to take the place of the epic genre, which by its content was intimately bound up with the world of paganism, and appears to have had a special standing in the polytheistic cults. In the process of total rejection of the polytheistic religions and their ritual expressions, in the cult common epic songs and also their epic genre were purged from the repertoire of the Hebrew authors." Robert, help us see the difference between the epic narratives of pagan literature and the prose narrative of the Hebrew Bible. How do you distinguish between the both, and why is it important?
Okay. First, I like to go back to what was a great inspiration for me. I'm sure it's a book you know, and to me remains the most abidingly powerful piece of literary criticism written in the 20th century, and that's Erich Auerbach's Mimesis, with the subtitle, "The Representation of Reality in Western Literature." Now, it begins with a comparison. The first chapter is a comparison of an episode from the Iliad with the story of the binding of Isaac in Genesis. And what the conclusion that Auerbach comes up with, which certainly in 1946, when the book was first published in German, would have been surprising, is that the true forerunner of the realist novel in ancient literature is not Homer, but it's the Hebrew Bible. Mm. And what he says, this is a little bit different from Talmon's connection with paganism, which is also valid. Okay, first you have to say that there's an enormous difference between a story composed in poetry and a story composed in prose. Mm. And in terms of the major narratives of the ancient world, the Hebrew Bible is unique in using prose. Now, when you're writing in poetry, or composing in poetry, I should say, you're bound to the poetic form, which in the case of Homer is dactylic hexameter, meaning lines of poetry that have 6 metric feet. That's the hexameter. And each metric feet is a dactyl, which means a finger. Now, the finger has 3 joints. So there's a long joint and 2 short joints. Say, like in the word Marilyn. Marilyn is a dactyl, long syllable, 2 short syllables. So you're kind of stuck with this. You have to keep everything in the dactylic hexameter, and you're not free to manipulate language as a prose writer is to fit the situation and to fit the character. For example, David's carefully contrived, rhetorically devised speech to Saul, and then Saul's gut-wrenching, "Is that your voice, David, my son?" You can't do that in dactylic hectameter, because if Saul speaks a line of dactyls, then David would have to speak a line of dactyls. See what I mean? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, Auerbach makes this is an aside in that brilliant chapter. He says, Odysseus wakes up every day of his life the same man. That is, he's the heroic Odysseus when he embarked for Troy 20 years earlier. He's the same heroic Odysseus when he returns to redeem his household and reclaim his wife. Whereas Jacob, Auerbach says, changes over time. He's not the same Jacob who first is ordered by his mom to deceive his father. Mm. He's not the same wily Jacob who contends with his grasping father-in-law Laban. And he's not the same Jacob who finds himself at the mercy of his sons, nor the old Jacob who stands before Pharaoh and says, when he's asked, how many are the days of the years of your life? He says, few and evil are the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained the days of the years of my fathers in their sojournings.
Wow.
So you have
Character development.
whole lifespan covering many decades in which a person changes through time. And that's part of the greatness of ancient Hebrew narrative, which is quite, I mean, I don't want to denigrate epic. I think Gilgamesh is interesting, but it's not in the same league as Homer. The two Homeric epics are great. That they have moving moments. The poetry is magnificent, but they're unable to do the same thing with a representation of character and lifespan that you find in the Hebrew Bible.
I cannot amen that enough. And there's one quote that I found. Let's see if I can find it again from you. There it is. This is from Robert, your book, The Art of Biblical Narrative. The biblical tale, through the most rigorous economy of means, leads us again and again to ponder the complexities of motives, ambiguities of character, because these are essential aspects of its vision of man, created by God, enjoying or suffering all the consequences of human freedom. Almost the whole range of biblical narrative, however, embodies the basic perception that man must live before God in the transforming medium of time, incessantly and perplexing in relation with others, and a literary perspective on the operations of narrative may help us more than any other to see how this perception was translated into the stories that we have had such a powerful, enduring hold on the imagination. And I think that's so beautiful and pairs perfectly with what you said there, because it's that character development of prose narrative that gets us in touch with ourselves, and that reveals a part of who we are, and the vulnerability and beauty of that, and the artistry of what these authors did is just, it's overwhelming. I got goosebumps right now just from what you read there. So thank you for that. The other part though is, as we mentioned before, the Bible is a literary mosaic, and it does contain elements of an epic. As an exercise, I'd like to unpack your translations and commentary of Genesis 6, 1 through 4. Before we dive into the topic, first I wanted to watch a short video clip featuring Tim Mackey of the Bible Project and the expert on the Dead Sea Scrolls that we recently had on our show, Dr. Andrew Perrin. It's going to connect all these dots and be very helpful. Let's watch this clip and then discuss.
There are many different strategies for reading the Bible, but one that I've always liked is this simple rule. If it's weird, it's important. And it doesn't get any more bizarre than this odd mention of giants, or in Hebrew, the Nephilim, in Genesis 6:4.
After the snake comes the rebellion of the sons of God in Genesis 6. We're told that they have sex with women, who then give birth to violent warrior giants.
Oh, right. The Nephilim. These are probably the strangest characters in the whole Bible.
Well, strange from your point of view, but ancient readers knew exactly what was going on. The ancient kingdoms around Israel claimed to be founded and protected by giant warrior kings who were part human, part God, and filled with divine wisdom.
Ah, I see. So the biblical authors are saying, hey, those warrior kings, they shouldn't be honored.
Right. In this story, they're portrayed as human rebels who are captive to spiritual evil, spreading their violence in God's good world. So this is what you call the work of ninja masters. And you're just supposed to know, because the ideal readers and the actual communities that produce these biblical texts guided by God's Spirit were ninja nerds, literary ninja nerds. And it's not just because they thought literary art is cool. It's exactly what Andy was sharing this morning. It's because God's Spirit guided these authors out of a context in which it's a way of seeing reality, in a way of seeing the world, and the texts are an instantiation of a way of understanding the divine purpose at work in the world. To notice patterns in these texts is training us to notice patterns in our own lives as well, as we attempt to discern the divine purpose in our day too.
In this case, we had an odd detail of giants that might seem like it doesn't register in our world of interpretations, yet in the ancient world for the Dead Sea Scrolls writers of these Aramaic texts, this was a detail that opened up an entire vista of interpretations of very important questions about evil, the past, the present, and the future.
Love that little clip. So I have, I'm going to read your translation and commentary of Genesis 6, but first, Robert, just respond to that clip.
Okay, the giants. First, I want to cite something that my Berkeley colleague Ron Hendel, was a very fine Bible scholar. His translation with immense commentary of the first 12 chapters of Genesis recently was issued in the Anchor Bible series. He points out that there are megalithic structures in the vicinity of ancient Canaan and within Canaan itself that have been unearthed. And people in the ancient world didn't know what to make of these huge stone edifices. And they came to the conclusion that there once must have been giants in the earth. Only giants could have put up things like this. This is a little bit like saying, well, the pyramids were too immense as structures for mere slaves to have put up. It must have been aliens from outer space who did it. You know that. You've heard that. So I think early Genesis registers a few bits which were part of the lore of ancient Israel, probably pre-monotheistic lore. And there was a sense in the figures that you call the arrangers that these, because of their antiquity, had a certain authority and couldn't be left out. So as enigmatic as they were included in the Genesis narrative. And of course, it's rather obvious that there's a certain approximate similarity with Greek mythology. That is, you have gods coming down to earth, having sex with human females, and demigods being born from them. And later tradition, of course, found ways to assimilate these mythological vestiges into a monotheistic worldview, as is illustrated by one of the two speakers in the clip you've just shown.
Yeah, I love that, and it's a part of the narrative, right? It's put in there. It has a reason for it. And I think when you just said, you quoted the as its comparison to Greek mythology, but I think what's important is for also these arrangers and editors, as them looking back or even current captivity that they may have been in. You know, we have the Babylonian mythology, all the different things that go along with that, where there's always, like the Anunnaki, there's always this story of some divine being or revelation coming down to a human to give them superior knowledge or wisdom. That is why this king or this king god is so much greater than all. And I feel like correct me if I'm wrong here, these authors or arrangers of the text, they were speaking a political or polemic witness also against their captors and oppressors of their day, to say, no, these heroes that you call these giant men that say that they are given this divine wisdom from these supernatural beings, those were actually deceived, and those were supernatural evil. So it was kind of taking the story and twisting it on its head. and not, again, the use of fiction. Personally, like, you said you had these megalithic structures. Who knows? Am I sit here and say that there weren't giants? That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying what was why I wanted to ask you this question, and why I think it's important to wrestle with this. It is there. And it's why did the authors or arrangers put it there is important. I wanted to read a quick excerpt, and then we can get one more comment, and we'll move on from it. Your excerpt on the commentary of this, where you say the entourage of celestial beings obscurely implied in God's use of the first person plural in the garden story. That's where he says, "Let us make man in our image." Here, that same celestial group produces, however fleetingly active agents in the narrative. God sees this intermingling of human and divine as the crossing of a necessary line of human limitation. Of this portion of the narrative in your commentary, you say, the Hebrew style of this entire clause reflects a certain epic heightening. One suspects that these words are either a citation of an old heroic poem or a stylistic allusion to the epic genre. So with all that in mind, like when we're just talking about the Mosaic and we just talked about prose narrative, it seems like the authors did want to include this epic portion in Genesis so early in the narrative. Why do you think it is there, and how should it shape our understanding of the narrative?
Okay. As the Bible developed, there was a sense of a kind of distance separating humankind from God. That is, in Genesis, like in the story of the Annunciation of the birth of Isaac to Abraham, God appears with two celestial sidekicks, two angels, and he looks like a wayfarer. That's what Abraham takes him for. That disappears after Genesis. And in Exodus, God manifests himself in a burning bush. And when later Moses says, "Let me see your glory," God basically says, "Nothing doing. You can see my afterburn, my wake from behind, but you can't see my glory." So that becomes, you might say, biblical doctrine, that God is somehow inaccessible, that he's so different from humanity that he remains remote from humanity. And yet there are a couple of these very early stories in which divine creatures descend to earth and have intercourse with human females. So it's a kind of counterweight to the overall view, this offering a vision that there may be moments when almost physical, or actually physical contact between the divine and the human is possible. And I would say that then manifests itself in the Christian doctrine of the incarnation.
Yeah, it's like the unseen realm is one way that the author that we love describes it, and it's like the seen and the unseen in the biblical narrative are much more intimately connected than we want to give weight to in our, at least in my modern understanding of life, and even as I've been taught Scripture. But that's something that I think that story, and just a lot of taking the Bible on its own terms, helps us understand, is that those two realms are much more intimately connected. So I love that. Thank you for commenting on that, because that means a lot to get your understanding for that as we wrestle through these texts. So what I wanted to do is just on this last point, before we close, I really love this in the article, the New York Times article. It later goes on to say that you Alter regularly composes his phrases in your translations that sound strange in English, and in part because they carry hints of ancient Hebrew within them. They call this a foreignized translation of the text, as it seeks to register linguistic and cultural differences into the translated language. So we've talked about it at the beginning of here, and I just want to say, you did a translation of the entire Hebrew Bible. It's 23 years in the making. It's one of the most valuable resources that I have on my bookshelf. I'm constantly inside of it. And as I tell you, as a prop to you, just so that you understand this too, almost every scholar or author that I interview, they all have this on their shelf. I always look for it. It's always there. It's it's a must-have. So, explain to us, as you did your translations, what it means to foreignize a text. What are you doing there?
Okay. Well, it's going in the opposite direction of all the modern translations done by Protestants, Catholics, and Jews, which want to make the Bible accessible to modern readers. So they transpose it into very modern language. They rearrange the syntax of the Bible so it reads like conventional modern syntax, which alas sometimes makes it read like the daily newspaper or like a governmental directive.
Mm.
And they'll do things like one, I think it's a Protestant translation that has Potiphar's wife saying to Joseph, "Make love to me." Of course, what she says in the Hebrew, which is perfectly viable today in English, is lie with me. Now, make love to me sounds like a modern frustrated housewife or maybe a mistress talking to her man, right? And you don't want that in the Bible. So, and by the way, the extreme expression of making the Bible accessible to readers, modern readers, is Eugene Peterson's translation.
The Message, yeah.
Which has things like, and the Lord said to all the growing things, green up. Or in the Lord's Prayer, instead of give us this day our daily bread, give us 3 square meals now. Now, I understand that. The Reverend Peterson wants to make the Bible as accessible as possible to his congregants and to congregants everywhere. And you could argue that that's legitimate, but it makes the Bible into something rather different from what it was originally. Mm. And when I foreignize, I'm in a way following in the footsteps of the King James Version, which often translated Hebrew idioms literally, like find favor in your eyes, which is a literal translation of the Hebrew idiom. And I don't think it existed in English before the King James Version, but now it exists in English. So here's what I felt I had to do. Foreignize sufficiently to give a flavor of the Hebrew. Like when the Hebrew says seed, in the sense of offspring or progeny, not to translate it as offspring or progeny or descendants, but to say seed, because we can understand what that is.
Yeah.
And it's even a concrete image that is, it's an image of semen, which is what human seed is. When when God says to Abraham, "And your seed will be like the stars of the heaven for multitude," um, in a way, I know this sounds a little indecorous for me to say, but it's a little bit like imagining the white semen splashed over the heavens in a million stars. Um, so I believe in foreignizing to get a strong flavor of the original. But of course, you have to balance it. If you foreignize too far, then the translation becomes unreadable.
Yeah.
And so I try to strike a balance.
Well, I love that because I think one of the original, Andrew Perrin was actually quoting another scholar. He said, if it's weird, then you need to pay attention. And I think what your translation does, and a lot more of these literal translations do, is that as a modern reader, when I'm reading, I'm like, what? Whoa, that's weird. Like there's something weird there. That's a point for me to lean in and pay attention and be like, okay, there's something going on here that the author or writer was trying to communicate that I'm not getting, and let me like dig in. And there's always these jewels or gems that you'll get out of those moments, and I have gotten a lot of them from your work. So what I wanted to do is just in my this final question is ask you to look forward to the future. I want to just say again that you and your career, your work on the Hebrew Bible has been beyond prolific for myself and millions across the globe, and you are still working. So as you look towards the future, what are the hopes that you have for the progress of translation and the future discovery for the Hebrew narrative? In the fast-paced technological world of electronic Bibles and artificial intelligence and algorithms, what are your hopes for the future of the Bible?
Okay, first I'll say something about artificial intelligence. I am a skeptic in this. I know it's going to do wonderful things. It's going to help radiologists read MRIs more precisely. It may ultimately find a cure for cancer. It can make sense of thousands and thousands of pieces of data in an instant. So it's going to do good things. But it doesn't have, it can't be based on imagination. It can't be based on literary sensitivity, because all it has to go with is data banks. And data banks aren't the same as human experience. Mm. So I don't see down the road that an AI-generated translation of the Bible is going to be astonishingly successful. Mm. As far as my own translation, I hope it'll stick around for a few generations. Obviously, it won't stick around forever for one simple reason. Languages keep changing. And a couple of centuries down the road, if we don't destroy ourselves, heaven help us from that, and please, knock on wood, English is not going to be the same as English in the 21st century. And there will be a need for new translations, just as the King James Version, apart from its many errors, is a wonderful achievement. But 400 years later, English is not what it once was early in the 17th century, and we can't get along on the King James Version. So that's pretty much where I see the future of translation. Now, if I could add to this, the future of writing about the Bible, I think it's kind of inexhaustible. You know, many years ago, at the beginning of my career, I wrote a book on Henry Fielding, and I think that it's a good book. And I discovered a number of years ago when I was invited to talk at a Fielding conference that Fielding scholars are still reading my book, so that's nice. But I concluded after finishing that book that I had all I had to say about Fielding. He was a great writer, a comic genius, but I think I had seen all that I am capable of seeing in the novels of Henry Fielding. Now, that is not true of the Hebrew Bible. I keep going back to it and I keep discovering more things. So right now, I'm doing a piece of writing on how the Hebrew Bible conveys complex relationships and profound feelings in very few words, sometimes in 2 or 3 words or a single word. And I'm coming up with examples that haven't occurred to me before. So I think there still are vistas of commentary and analysis that are going to be there for the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah. I love that. It's inexhaustible beyond measure. And that's the beauty and wonder that keeps me coming back to know that 50 years from now, I'm still going to be in that same awe and wonder. And I will say this, that I am pretty confident that your translation is going to stick around for a long time. It's an amazing accomplishment that you undertook, and it's been such a valuable resource for millions. And as we close, I just wanted to pause and thank you for all that you've done for myself and so many others across the world. Your work is truly a gift to humanity, as it opens up one of the most valuable resources in the entire world for discovery and appreciation. From the bottom of my heart, thank you, Robert, for all that you've done.
Well, thank you, Jason, for your very generous words. And let me add that it touches me that my work can speak to somebody in the evangelical community, which is sort of far from where I came.
Yeah. Well, the gap has been bridged, so I'm very grateful for that, and I'm grateful to know you now. I want to say thank you to our audience. Make sure you check out the notes. I'm going to have links to all the books that we talked about. Dive into some of these resources. They are so valuable. I can't recommend the full commentary and translation of the Hebrew Bible, but if you want to just break it up, there's even smaller portions of separate parts of the translation that you can purchase. I'm telling you, get it. Make sure you guys subscribe if you're not. And again, Robert, from myself and the entire audience, it has been an honor and privilege. Thank you for being here with us today, sir.
Well, thank you for your fine questions.
I appreciate that. Folks, thanks again for watching with us. As we always say, stay tuned. The beginning is near.